Hi, Wally Taylor, Medical Director, Texas Integrative Medicine in Austin, Texas, working to keep you healthy from head to toe. I wanted to talk to you for a few minutes today about a subject that you probably are at least partly familiar, and that's leaky gut. So I see chronic complex illness, which is a whole constellation of symptoms like chronic fatigue, headaches, aches and pains, brain fog, anxiety, depression, insomnia, that's related to exposure to environmental toxins. We're living in a progressively degrading world with progressive pollution of the air, food, and water, and it's beginning to take its toll. These symptoms that I just described do result from persistent exposure, usually in small amounts over long periods of time, until finally the rain barrel gets full and you start breaking through with symptoms. So a lot of people talk about the fact that this chronic complex illness, or it's also called environmentally acquired illness, starts in the gut, or it starts in the digestive tract. And I honestly think that's to a large extent true. And why do I say that? Well, first of all, the digestive tract is so critical for us because it is really the number one place that our bodies are in close association with our external environment. The lining of our digestive tract, which some estimates say is the size of a tennis ball court, is of course responsible to do two very important things in our body. A lot of people don't realize this, but the most important thing, the first thing that the intestinal tract lining is required to do is act as a barrier. The skin, of course, is one of our body's main barriers to keep toxins from the outside world from getting into our body. But it turns out that the digestive tract is even more important for this. And one of the reasons that we know this is the fact that our immune system, which is the system of the body that's designed to protect us from threats from the external environment, about 70% of the cells of our immune system actually are placed or live in very close proximity to the inside lining of that digestive tract. And the reason for that is because so many of the environmental invaders and toxins that would come in don't actually come through the skin, but they actually come from the intestinal lining. The second most important thing that the intestine has to do is, of course, absorb our nutrients when we eat and drink. And this is, of course, critical if we're going to be healthy, if we're going to have normal immune systems, normal energy, and normal ability to detoxify or eliminate toxins. So when people say treat the gut first, they're absolutely right. When I was in medical school, this is when the term leaky gut first started to be bantered about. And I'll be honest with you, for the first number of years that we heard about it, there was a lot of disparagement of the term leaky gut. People imagined that we were actually talking about large ulcerative holes in the wall of the intestine, which were allowing things to flood through. Well, now we understand that leaky gut is actually just a microscopic phenomenon where the normal tight junctions that hold our inner lining digestive cells together, the epithelium of the intestinal lining, actually starts to slightly separate. And when that happens, of course, substances that are within the digestive lumen, the inner part of the intestinal tract, the empty tube, which is actually filled with food in the process of being digested and then later eliminated. This, of course, is warm and moist, contains lots of microbes, lots of nutrients, and unfortunately, often lots of toxins and pathogenic bacteria. So when it becomes leaky, or what some people would call has increased intestinal permeability, then many of these substances from inside the digestive tract actually begin to leak across and enter our body through the wall of the intestine. And of course, that's where they come in contact with this 70% of our immune system that is arrayed along the line of our digestive tract. Some people call it the GALT, or gut-associated lymphoid tissue. In any case, when various toxins come across, one of the worst ones I see in my practice here in Austin is mold toxins or mycotoxins that typically are breathed in from the air. They lodge in the mucosa of the nose, and then they they drain back down the back of the throat and ultimately are swallowed and end up in the digestive tract. Very toxic to the inner lining of the digestive tract, and very capable of causing this leaky gut. Some other toxins that can do this, actually one of the very worst, is a group of foods, what we call glutens. So I'm sure all of y'all have heard the importance of gluten-free diet. Seems to be a big rage nowadays. But let me tell you this, the concerns that we have about gluten and the role that it plays in contributing significantly to leaky gut are absolutely real. That's not going to go away. What is here, I believe, to stay is the understanding that gluten is one of the most toxic substances you can eat. And here's the thing, gluten is actually not one molecule. Of course, most people associate gluten with a protein called gliadin, which is actually made up in white wheat or grain that's been milled into flour. But as it turns out, there are gluten-like substances, about 400 of them known, and they exist primarily in the seeds of multiple grass grains. So in addition to wheat, we do know also that there's gluten-like products or proteins in oats, in barley, in rye, in sorghum, in millet, in teff, in buckwheat, and even in rice and corn. So here's the thing. These glutens are members of a group of molecules that are also known as lectins, Lectins. And lectins are actually plant poisons that were evolved by the plants, especially these grass grains, for the purposes of thwarting insects from eating the grains. So lectins are these molecules that have evolved, like gluten. Gluten's one of the worst, that are toxic to insects to protect the seeds, but at the same time, they are also toxic to higher order animals such as mammals and humans. So lectins are really the issue here. And what ends up happening when we eat lectins, or especially glutens, is that it contributes to a toxicity of the inner lining of the digestive tract, which ultimately leads to what we call leaky gut. Now, here's something that's very exciting. Not 100% of all people seem to be exquisitely sensitive to these glutens. And it turns out that there is a genetic test that is able to demonstrate which of these individuals might be especially sensitive to gluten. This test is what we call the Hla Dq test. It looks at a group of markers on our cells, which some people would call transplant markers or transplant antigens. But these are actually very similar to the genetic tests that can be run, which would demonstrate which people might be also especially sensitive to mold toxins or mycotoxins. And there's a certain amount of overlap in these genetic markers. But in any case, we are now capable in our office here in Austin to get a blood sample and evaluate these antigens in the blood in order to be able to tell which of the folks that we see are really especially sensitive to these toxic effects of gluten that can end up leading to leaky gut. So if we find out that if you've got this issue of increased sensitivity to gluten, which would contribute to leaky gut, we know that it is absolutely critical, if we're going to really be able to help you to completely heal and turn off unwanted inflammation and get that intestinal lining to be restored to its normal, lacking increased intestinal hyperpermeability, then it's a matter of being 100% off of gluten and all forms of gluten, not just white wheat gluten. And what we know is that it's kind of like being pregnant. You either are or you aren't. Just cutting back on gluten doesn't seem to do the trick, doesn't seem to really restore the normal gut lining that cuts down on these toxins leaking through and encountering the immune system. And you might say, so what happens if these toxins get through and interact with the immune system? Well, this is interesting because what happens in the gut doesn't stay in the gut. Kind of like they say what happens in Las Vegas stays in Las Vegas. Well, it's not true with the gut. So if you have toxins, whether it be mold toxins or gluten, or even fragments of some of the bacteria that are inside your gut lumen, and I don't even mean just bad bacteria, even some of the good bacteria, some of the so-called probiotics, or the normal intestinal microbiome, but especially the cell walls of many of these bacteria, when they break down, if they get in and they interact with our immune system, they cause the immune system to get really, really upset. And when the immune system gets upset, it forms this inflammatory reaction, which causes the release of all of these signaling molecules that are saying danger, danger, danger. And these signaling molecules don't just stay in the gut. They actually get into the bloodstream, into the lymphatics. They actually circulate throughout the body. And we know that especially if there's even just a little bit of deterioration or increased permeability of what we call the blood-brain barrier, they can even get into the brain, where they can generate a lot of inflammation within the brain. You know, we used to not think that there was an immune system in the brain. Just a few years ago, they began to demonstrate that, yes, indeed, the brain does have its own immune system that is capable of getting caught up in this inflammation, which can trigger and lead to things like brain fog, headaches, migraines, and lots of other neurologic symptoms. So the point here is that we need to find out who's especially sensitive to gluten, especially among that group of patients that's already suffering from the signs and symptoms of environmentally acquired illness, or what I call chronic complex illness, or so-called mystery illness, which is really no mystery. You just have to understand what the root cause is. So some of y'all might be aware of the work of Dr. Terry Wahls. Dr. Terry Wahls is a lady, a physician, who actually had debilitating multiple sclerosis and was bound to a wheelchair. Her neurologic specialist all told her that she should get her affairs in order, and she was going to basically become totally incapacitated. Well, she refused to believe that, and she studied about leaky gut, increased intestinal hyperpermeability, the inflammation that can arise in the digestive tract and then spread to the whole body, in this case the brain, contributing to her MS, which many people think is caused by immune self-injury, or a so-called autoimmune disease. And darn if Dr. Wahls didn't completely change her diet. She completely got off of all glutens, all grass grains, and really started to eat a very nutrient-rich vegetable or plant-based diet that was very clean, absolutely no preservatives or chemicals, just as organic as she could possibly get. And in this way, and doing some other things to change her lifestyle in a way that helped to fight inflammation, Dr. Wahls gradually became better and better. And currently she rides her bike to work every day. She's very, very active. She's a writer. She attends conferences and she lectures to patients and doctors. She even holds her own course every year to tell other people how to get well as she did. She even has a diet named after her, the Wahls diet. And I know some of you all have heard me talk about Dr. Peter Osborne. Dr. Osborne is a doctor over in Sugar Land, Texas. He started up an organization called the Gluten-Free Society. And Dr. Osborne has a great book. I highly recommend it, that emphasizes some of these things we're talking about today. And that's No Grain, No Pain. But the premise of his book, of course, is that if you do follow this grain-free diet, if you're one of these susceptible people, which, by the way, if you look at the group that has chronic complex illness and autoimmunity, it's almost all of you, probably 99% that would show these genetics of increased sensitivity to gluten. So anyway, I know you might have some other questions. I hope this resonates with you. If you like it, please follow my YouTube channel. Share the video with family and friends that you think might benefit, and feel free to comment. I'm always anxious to hear what you're thinking, what you're questioning, and I plan to be continuing to roll out more on this. Just want to give you a couple of teasers I'm real excited about. First of all, I'm in the process of writing a book about detoxification, kind of looking at this to be sort of a culmination of my life's work to try to get this out for folks that might be in a situation of dealing with toxins from the environment. Also going to spend a lot of time in the book talking about this problem of progressive degradation of our world environment. I was looking at some videos over the weekend in preparation for some research on the book, and I was looking at some of the statistics coming out of India and China about air pollution and water pollution and the effect that it's having on the people's health over there, especially, of course, the babies and the older folks. And it's just, it just tears my heart. And it's just scary to think that the pollution that's going on over there in Asia, unfortunately, it's not just confined to Asia. It gets in our oceans, it gets in our atmosphere. We all suffer. The biggest problem, I believe, is that there's just too darn many of us on the planet. 7.7 billion, and they anticipate that by 2050, that number will be 9 billion, and by 2100, 11 billion. So anyway, kind of scary. We all need to start really paying attention right now for the good of our children, our grandchildren, and even our generations yet to come, to try to keep our world beautiful, that we don't see any more extinction of many of these beautiful species like the monarch butterfly, which apparently is really on the decline right now, and a lot of these beautiful, colorful birds that we see, that the warblers and such, that unfortunately are really on the decline right now because of the environmental degradation. Well, anyway, I'll get off my soapbox now, but I wanted you to know about a little bit more about leaky gut and how you can hopefully change your diet in a way that will help you heal, help get rid of inflammation, and help you get over your symptoms of chronic complex illness. Great. Have a blessed day.